It's only a word.
So I recently came across this film analysis of Event Horizon when doing some research for my own breakdown of the film. The Event Horizon was one giant hallucination explained. Roanoke Gaming makes the claim that the Event Horizon was essentially nothing more than the crew all getting brain damage via gravitational waves, and the so-called hell or chaos dimension was just perfectly coordinated hallucinations induced via this progressive brain damage, which is pretty ridiculous.
And this is why I believe to a degree they are all suffering from brain damage as well. The gravitational waves were enough to shear weak points in the ship, thus venting it into atmosphere. So think about that shearing force and what it could do to the human brain as well.
There is nearly 800,000 views on the video, which admittedly I'm jealous of, but appeal to popularity is a fallacy. And people taking this as an actual valid analysis of the film in the video's comments, I have to fact check and debunk this utterly absurd theory and point out how fallacious it actually is. And as you can tell, I am a huge fan of the film, so I feel obligated to defend the film and what it really is.
With the core, the visual warping of space-time being perceived by our eyes, I believe may have damaged the human brain to a degree, which is why, at this point, everything begins going sideways for the crew. Not only are they dealing with the hypothesized possible signal emitting from the very ship itself, which may be altering the human genome, but the blast from the core has also damaged the physical connections within the brain. This allows for the brain tissue to begin misreporting what it is taking in from the senses, and we will see more evidence for this shortly.
If his analysis is just an exercise at looking at the film through an ultra-rational, scientific-y, debunk the supernatural type of lens to appeal to his scientific YouTube audience, and not meant to be an accurate, real analysis of what the creators of the film actually intended, then fine. Admittedly, I haven't seen any of his other videos, but based on some of the responses I've seen in comments on the video, it seems he is claiming this as a literal interpretation of the film, and some of his audience accepts it as being accurate, which is, again, outrageous, dumb, and outright wrong.
This ship essentially used a singularity in front of the ship, allowing it to jump across the universe by folding space-time.
And I will say a lot of the scientific jargon that he gets into in videos is interesting and valid within its own merit, but has little to do with actually comprehending the film. It's obvious the dude has a high IQ, but he is completely wrong about the movie.
Over in the medical area, Justin is alive but non-responsive to any stimuli. As mentioned, brain damage could do this. Higher areas of the brain that are either having difficulty contending with this damage could be a very real reality, with the body using the lower areas of the brain for life support, but it also may be possible that the body is just continuing on without influence of the brain, which could be possible for a short while, just not long term.
Listening to any interview or commentary the director Paul W.S. Anderson gives on the film debunks all of this in 2 seconds, clearly. But I'll address some of the key points he makes in the video and challenge them.
It was clear what we were making was a haunted house film, and in any good haunted house film, and we looked at Robert Wise's The Haunting a lot, and that was a big influence on us.
Going over to it, we begin to see their minds are becoming affected. She spots her youngling with his legs torn up as she's grabbed by DJ, bringing her to. It's at this point we can actually see what sort of brain damage is showing up first. The frontal lobe of a person is associated with essentially the emotional brakes of kind of how we operate. It helps mitigate strong feelings and keeps the person in control of their actions. I would propose that this area of the brain is the first area that seems to be struggling after the gravitational wave event, which makes sense seeing as the frontal lobe is still operational, it's just working at a decreased capacity. So you're probably asking how this relates.
The most obvious evidence that this is not merely hallucinations is the previous recording of the crew. Every crew member can see and hear the horrific hell orgy with Latin narration and demonic screeching on the recording. The audio clips themselves were heard before the gravity drive induced any potential brain damage.
Fucking hell is that?
That's not merely subjective past trauma hallucinations or destructive behavior caught on camera via brain damage.
Look at that one guy offering up his eyeballs. It is also well known that people with traumatic brain injuries will sometimes turn to damaging their own meat suits, supporting the idea further that their brains are not contending well.
That's a little absurd if you have heard the full description of what the lost deleted scenes of this looks like.
The other scene that was heavily trimmed was what happened to the original crew of the Event Horizon. There was a whole kind of big, violent, kind of bloody orgy scene.
As the ship starts bleeding. Why is it bleeding? I think it's just one giant hallucination. But then again, they say the ship's alive, or is it? We'll discuss in a moment.
Why is it bleeding? Because the creators of the film took influence from The Shining and, in their own words, wanted to make a haunted house in space type of film, and this is a nod to The Shining elevators. The Shining, a supernatural hotel possession type of film, Event Horizon, a ship possessed in space type of film. Brain damage theory debunked. And even if there was some sort of brain damage occurring within this fictional reality, who's to say that isn't one of the mechanisms by which the hell dimension plays with people's internal perceptions? One does not disprove the other. That is a fallacy. And how does Weir have superhuman strength? Is that from brain damage too? So you're telling me that the brain damage in each crew member perfectly targets the areas of visual and auditory hallucinations and paranoia, but does nothing to affect motor function, speech, or any other basic functions of the brain? That seems highly, highly unlikely.
But somehow the ship knew. And this is why I believe this is based on brain damage and an undiscovered signal coming out of the portal.
This sounds like if M. Night Shyamalan made Event Horizon or something.
In the background, however, we see a delicious meat paste on the wall, and what's the deal with that? Well, first and foremost, this was what the bioscan was reading, and this is why they couldn't really nail it down in any one place, because the ship is seemingly covered in this crap. But the meat on the wall is clearly from the original crew. However, for them to survive, or at least their tissue survive, then it appears fundamentally their cells would have needed to change. But we know a fairly prominent occurrence amongst cancer cells, and it's quite interesting, is concerning like their viability.
Actually, there is no direct proof that the meat on the walls was only directly from the bodies of the crew. That's a false assumption. Maybe some of their eyeballs and other chunks got mixed in. But aside from just being a disturbing cool aesthetic for a fictional horror film, I would more attribute it to the chaos or hell or the warp dimension terraforming itself into the ship when it was in the black hole gravity drive.
Yes, brain damage is prevalent amongst the crew. However, there is something emanating from the core itself that changes the genetic coding of humans, allowing for the meat paste on the wall to thrive.
I find this analysis to be absurd from the start. You were trying to argue diagnostic medical facts about fictional characters within a fictional story. That is like trying to analyze the Lord of the Rings by running the books through MRI machines and blood tests. Trying to rationalize fiction is within itself irrational. You are trying to prove the unprovable.
Well, thank you for that scientific analysis, Mr. Smith.
Yeah, we did.
Wild speculations into the meat being cancerous again does nothing to prove or disprove the hell dimension. Paul W.S. Anderson was far more concerned on symbolism and iconography of the film, as seen in the constant use of cruciform imagery. Trying to diagnose scientifically the set of a fictional movie is absurdly silly. The film taking imagery from cathedrals is a provable fact.
We saw it as being a very gothic movie. So what we did early on in pre-production is we scanned Notre Dame Cathedral. We built a 3D model of Notre Dame using the towers of Notre Dame as the engine thruster pods.
Speculating on cancer tissues and other specific areas of brain damage is not a single interview from the creators of the film mention any of this.
Smith hasn't seen anything though, as he's been on the outside of the ship, and this is rather interesting because he was the furthest away. It may be possible that the distance he was, the gravitational waves had dissipated enough to affect metal, but because cells are more loosey-goosey, they were able to maintain their integrity, meaning he didn't have the same brain damage that the others had.
The theory that Smith didn't have any hallucinations, at least in this cut of the film, because he was furthest from the gravity drive, I admit is interesting and one of your stronger arguments. Notice he is the only one in the crew wearing a cross, so maybe the film was subtly implying he was saved from hell for being a Christian, or maybe it's both. This analysis entirely ignores the religious iconography and symbolism and aesthetic. If I watch a Hindu film, I would look at it through a Hindu lens. If I watched a film on Norse mythology, I'd analyze it through a Norse mythological lens, projecting hyper-rationality onto a film that clearly takes influence from Christian ideology, and ignoring everything in the film that points to that is just straight up lying.
Jesus.
That's what Justin says when seeing the cross-shaped ship. Accurate film analysis requires an agnostic lens. The goal is to see the mindset of those that made the film, not projecting onto it with selective interpretation.
The ship went and where it was, but where has no idea where this thing has been. Thanks for unsubscribing.
Fucking hell is that?
I think this is the closest you got to actually accurately analyzing the film. Weir's name was intentionally made to sound like where in space and time. The film is loaded with cryptic, symbolic references like this pun within the name because it's a work of fiction and not a scientific journal.
You know nothing. Hell is only a word. The reality is much, much worse.
Hell is just a word, it's irrelevant. That basically sums up Roanoke Gaming's entire breakdown. It's all basically either arguing semantics, whether you want to call it hell or not is besides the point entirely, or arguing false dichotomies built on entirely unprovable speculations of cancerous meat walls and gravity wave brain damage. It's entirely irrelevant to the purpose and goal of the film, to scare you and make you maybe think about the limits of technology. The film's pretty straightforward on what it's meant to be. It's a dimension where the laws of objective reality are shattered and the black hole is devoid of all light, hence why you don't need eyes to see there. Devoid of spiritual light, you could say. Whether you want to call that pure chaos, evil, or hell, really doesn't matter.
What happened to your eyes?
Where we're going, we won't need eyes to see.
So I think that about covers it. I just had to make a response video so that opinion, very, very wrong opinion, can be publicly challenged because honestly his analysis kind of pisses me off. It's a perfect representation of you're so smart, you're dumb type of thing, like Albert Einstein not being able to tie his shoes or whatever. And in this case, the shoes are just a hell orgy. Anyways, that's it. Please like, share, subscribe, comment below. Thank you very much and bye.
Well, thank you for that scientific analysis, Mr. Smith.
Yeah, we did.